Bronson, what's going on, brother? Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast tonight.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise, man. Unfortunately, I just missed you. You were down in my neck of the woods in Texas. I think last month you were here for a few weeks. Was that right?
Yeah, we were in Austin mainly, kind of just checking it out. Uh, I had an interest in possibly actually moving there previously. So we had started not initially planning to go to Austin. We started in Oakland, San Francisco for a little trip. We had gone down there. We were invited to an event to listen to Michael Schellenberger speak. I'm not sure if you know who he is,
No.
but he was actually um, one of the first people to receive the Twitter files. Um, and so uh, my fiance had a woman on her podcast who was friends with Michael Schellenberger. And so through mutual connection, we kind of ended up at this event um, and just kind of decided to keep going, keep making our way down the California coast. Um, we went to um, Monterey, and then we went to Big Sur, and then we made our way down to LA. We had some family there, and eventually made our way over to Austin, kind of doing a little US trip. And yeah, Austin's an interesting place. So for the past year and a half, we've kind of been traveling all over. We were in Asia for about a year, and then we wanted to explore some of the states to see if there was some place outside of Canada that might feel like home. So that's kind of how I ended up in your neck of the woods.
So when you made this trip to Austin from California, was that like by road trip or did you fly out of LAX into Austin? What did that look like?
Yeah, so we just flew. We had done the California road trip, and then we decided we're just going to go check out Austin for a couple weeks and see what it was all about, because it kind of sounds a little bit like almost like a new Athens. Like so many people are moving there for entertainment reasons, for new opportunities in careers and community and all that kind of stuff. So we're interested in checking it out. Um, I don't know if we would end up moving there, but yeah, it was just kind of on the list of things that we were wanting to accomplish over the last year and a half, as far as finding kind of a new place to live. Because um, basically, we had left Canada right after Canada opened its lifted its travel restrictions after COVID, because we were in lockdowns for basically 3 years in Canada. So the moment that we had the opportunity to leave, we did. We packed up everything into our storage um, and left our full time jobs, and then we went traveling in Asia for a year. So this past year and a half has basically been kind of one big adventure and a series of many adventures along the way. And we eventually made our way back to North America, but I think we still have some more looking to do, because we haven't quite found that place that feels like home yet.
I knew you were in Asia. I have seen some of your posts on it, but I didn't realize you were out that way for that long. So like when did you actually fly out that way, and where did you go to first?
Yeah, so we flew out, I believe it was Sep- October 9th. Sorry, pardon me, October 7th, 2022. And so we started in India. Um, we were in northern India for about 2 months, and then we made our way to Thailand, and we were there for I think about 75 days. And then we were facing more restrictions with COVID getting back into India. So we stopped in Sri Lanka, kind of in a rerouting trip, and stayed for about a month. We loved it there. And then we made our way back to India, and then back to Thailand, actually, and then finished in Indonesia. Um, so the reason that we kind of had to leave India the first time after 2 months um, was a lot of this political stuff that's kind of been happening between Canada and India was causing a lot of challenges with us for um, just getting around and money as well. So we weren't able to. We were in India in the north, um, And because things are very seasonal there, because it either gets too hot or too rainy or too smoky, depending on what the season is. So it was getting too cold in the north, and we wanted to go explore the south of India. But we basically could not get down to the south no matter how hard we tried. We ended up getting stuck in Rishikesh for basically 2 months because we couldn't buy flights from Indian Airlines. We couldn't access money from our bank accounts or through ATMs or anything like that because of some of these political issues that Canada had. And we talked to other travelers, and people from Ireland were able to take out money. People from the US were able to take out money. People from Russia were able to take out money. And so we couldn't go north. We couldn't go south. And so we were like, okay, we're going to have to go somewhere else. So we went to Thailand, which wasn't initially in our itinerary. But we just kind of had to go with the flow, and it ended up being a really cool adventure. And yeah, just the whole trip was kind of interesting like that. It just seemed like it was guiding itself. So then we ended up in Thailand for a couple months, traveling around. We were in the island of Koh Phangan, and I think the district of Krabi as well, and a few other places. We went north. But yeah, it was just a really interesting journey, and eventually ended up back in India, where we spent most of our time. We had been there for about, I think, 5 months, but 7 months total. We had lived in India last year. So yeah, it's been quite the year for us.
So was there eventually a point with being in India where things kind of sort of, I guess for lack of a better term, settled down and you were actually able to access money again, and maybe there wasn't so much turmoil being a Canadian traveling in this country?
Yeah, it seemed that way. So where we went the second time, rather than kind of traveling all over the place, which is what we were doing when we had first arrived there, we basically flew into Delhi, and then we flew directly up to the Himalayas, and then we stayed in that Himalayan region basically for the entire time that we were there. And for a number of reasons. One, it was kind of the high season up there, and that region is very chill compared to a lot of other places. It's a really interesting culture up in the mountains. It's a lot of adventure tourism, trekking. There's some really interesting, more laid back communities up there that are welcoming to tourists. So it was really just very easy up there. And we were also getting treatment at an Ayurvedic hospital, mainly for my partner, but I also went through that whole process to have the experience myself. And so that was kind of taking up the bulk of the time that we had spent there. But we definitely had some time for some different adventures. I went and did a trek called Triund, which I think it's about, I think, 3,000 meters elevation. And that was just absolutely breathtaking, getting to actually see the Himalayas in person. I've never experienced mountains quite like that. And I'm from British Columbia, so that says a lot about what those landscapes are like. But we basically stayed there the whole time we were in India, and really got to kind of become part of the village life there. The people in that region are incredibly warm and welcoming. And if you stay there long enough, you kind of become part of the local community. And the interesting thing about traveling India is there's a specific kind of person who backpacks India and travels throughout India. So you just have this amazing ability to connect with other people while you're there, make lifelong friends, and just sharing a lot of really interesting experiences with other travelers that you don't really get in other places. You know, we had been all over. We'd been to Thailand, we'd been to Sri Lanka, we've been to Indonesia, and in a lot of those places actually struggled to find a community of travelers. But India is just this really interesting place that invites some of the most interesting people with really fascinating stories. So We absolutely loved it up there. I think we probably could have stayed longer, but again, we ran into some more issues with some of the politics that are kind of happening in the background. So some of it is just my own theories, but basically they changed the visa laws towards the end of our trip. Um, and basically we're kicking out everyone. So initially we had a visa that was supposed to last us for about for 1 year. But they had changed the visa laws and it was very gray area. No one really knew what the rules were, but there was rumor between travelers going around that you could only stay there for 6 months per calendar year. And so we're like, what the hell are we going to do? We're still in treatment. And my partner had actually fallen off a scooter and torn her shoulder. So at that point,
Mm.
we weren't really in a position to just start bouncing around all over the place again. So that was kind of challenging. So initially our plan was to stay there until September, but we basically had to rush to get out of the country. And again, that had a lot to do with some of the stuff that our prime minister was, I guess, doing to create conflict with India. And now they have really poor relations. Like, I don't know if you've heard anything about some of the stuff with the Khalistan demonstrators that is now happening here in Canada and India. But basically, I believe it was back in the 80s, there was this big uprising of separatists in the Punjab region. And so that caused a lot of problems. And there was a rebellious uprising, and a lot of people had died. And our prime minister was basically encouraging people in the Punjab region in India to become separatists and to create this Khalistan. And so we have a very large Punjabi population here in Canada. And so since I've been back, I've seen people driving all over the place with signs for Khalistan, and it's just very complicated. And so they had also, or I guess not they, Trudeau had accused the Indian government of murdering a terrorist on Canadian soil who was a leader of this movement. And so it became this really polarizing thing. And so recently, we were actually supposed to go back to India in the fall, and India had banned Canadians and put a stop on all visas for Indians going to, or sorry, pardon me, for Canadians going to India. So it's this big political mess, which is strange to be dealing with because Canada had always had really good relations with India previously. And so that had kind of complicated things for us because our original plan was to be back in Asia. So obviously that hasn't happened yet. I believe they have started to open things up again, but there's been some interesting challenges that we've had to overcome throughout that journey that we didn't really have a lot of control over. So that was why we inevitably ended up back traveling around Southeast Asia.
So were you able to find yourself situated to continue these treatments that were necessary? Like maybe when in Thailand? I mean, is that where you went back to once you had to like leave again?
So there was basically a certain point because we'd been there so long where you can only do so much detoxing. There would be a whole podcast if we wanted to dive into Ayurveda and what that is, but essentially it's an ancient Indian medicine, and we were specifically doing panchakarma, which is a detox protocol essentially that's specifically prescribed to each person. And what we were there for, actually, my partner was there to cure fibromyalgia. So she had tried everything within the Western medical system and what was available to her, wasn't finding any solutions. And she had been treated by this doctor for illness like years and years ago and had a lot of success with him. So this was kind of like our last attempt to see if we could find a solution for a lot of her symptoms. And amazingly, it worked. And so she is
Wow.
doing incredibly well now, is extremely healthy, probably about 90% like healed of all of her symptoms and stuff like that, which were initially triggered by a car accident that kind of developed into this later. But going through that whole process was months of ups and downs, and I was going through the treatment as well. So it was really interesting for me to have that perspective, because I don't think I would have really understood what she was going through if I didn't go through the treatment with her. But basically, we had done 2 rounds of that, and there's only so much detoxing that you can do at one time. So essentially, she had done enough at that point. She'd recovered quite well, and basically had to take a break from detoxing anyways. But we did end up completing the treatment. We actually rolled the dice and we overstayed our visas. And then luckily nothing happened when we got to the airport and we went through customs. But yeah, we kind of had to get it done because we'd come so far with all of that stuff. And she needed a little bit of time for the shoulder to heal. So at that point, we were kind of ready to go. Our thought process was, we're going to go to Thailand. We're just going to relax for a little bit and just kind of take a break and see where our traveling is going to take us next. But it wasn't really that relaxing when we got there. It's kind of a crazy story. Like, we had a great time when we had first gone there the first time. We were just in indulgence mode after lockdowns and all that stuff. So we were partying the whole time. We're eating all kinds of crappy food. And so we had a lot of fun the first time, but we kind of came back after being in India in these traditional, very peaceful rural villages in the mountains with sheep herders and this kind of environment. And we got to Thailand, and it was just like not really in alignment with us when we got there the second time. But basically, shortly after we got to the island of Koh Phangan, right next door to us, the night that we moved into our villa, I believe he was some famous chef. I think he was, no, pardon me. It was a famous chef, and I think he was a famous actor's son in Spain, if I'm not mistaken. Brutally murdered a famous doctor from Colombia. And so this was kind of a crazy story, but basically, I guess it was all over the news and we didn't know about it yet. But we had met with some friends of ours for a hike one day, and they told us about it. And we're like, where did that happen? What region was that in? And so they had told us that it was basically at the beach that we were staying at. And so we got back to her place and we were looking just to try and get some information about, like, where did this happen? What had happened? And we were talking to the hotel owner the villa owner, and it was literally right next to us. And so I guess this guy had been planning it all week. They had video footage of him going around the village, buying supplies and all this kinds of stuff. And basically, this chef hacked this guy into pieces and then distributed his body parts all over the island. So they found like torso at the beach, parts in the garbage. And I guess he had taken body parts on his kayak and distributed them around other beaches. So they found them all over the island of Koh Phangan. And so obviously, like, our little idea of paradise had been shattered at that point. And so it was pretty difficult to settle into just relaxing and having some time at the beach in the sun. So that was a crazy start to Thailand for the second time going there that year. And so we were having a really hard time kind of like getting settled while we were there. One, because it was high season, so it's difficult to find accommodations, but two, obviously we're like, this is just dark, and it happened right next door. So we stayed there still for about a month, but didn't have a very good time or relaxing time. And then decided to check out Indonesia. And we started, I think, in Bali. um, which is kind of, it's a very touristy place, but there's lots of good food there and stuff like that. And we had some friends that we had met in India the first time, that had invited us there, and they set us up with a place and all that kind of stuff. And so we had traveled around Indonesia for a while. We went to Komodo Island, saw the Komodo dragons. We went swimming with manta rays and did a bunch of different uh, traveling around kind of more rural areas, specifically the island of Flores. We had some really amazing experiences there. And probably that was probably the best travel experience we had in Indonesia, was going to these super remote village on the island of Flores and just getting to spend time with like the village kids and stuff like that. You know, staying in very humble accommodations in guest houses and getting to have the kind of cultural experience you just wouldn't have anywhere else, which was very cool, to have that kind of true backpackers experience where you're sitting down on the floor in someone's kitchen with a bunch of other dirty backpackers, and someone's feeding you local food and their families in the kitchen cooking it for you. So yeah, I mean, so much has happened, like basically over the past year. It's hard to compress it into one conversation, but that was kind of the trail that we took, I guess, and then inevitably ended up back in North America.
Gotcha. Okay. So you have political turmoil in India, crazy, brutal killers in Thailand. I hope that the misadventures ended when you left Thailand. You made it to Indonesia, or did you have any misfortune follow you there?
Well, I mean, Indonesia, I'll be completely honest, was probably our least favorite place that we went. I don't
Oh,
think that we
really?
would go back there. And it was just that we had a lot of negative experiences with the locals that we hadn't experienced elsewhere. Um, you know, Surprisingly, like you do have a lot of like, I guess, scamming in all of these places.
Sure.
Um, but there was one incident in Indonesia, basically, which kind of was what sent us home. And we had spent about 5 or 6 days traveling through these super rural areas, with this driver who had me completely convinced that he was our brother, like our best friend. You know, I usually have a really strong intuition about people, and he just totally blindsided us at the end of our trip. Basically, robbed us at the very end of this 5 day trip, for about 200 Canadian dollars. And the whole time I was completely convinced this person was, a good person. He was a friend. I had no, you know, thoughts that this person had any ill intention. And we were taking photos together. We were talking about each other's families. He wanted to take us to his village, and yeah, it was just really personal. We become very close with this person, and then at the very end, um, we had given him the money for driving us for those 5 days, and basically, he disappeared for a couple minutes, and I guess he had stuffed half the big bills in his pocket, then came back and just turned on a show, where he was just acting like, oh, we don't, I think you miscounted the bills and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, where are the red bills? Where are all the bills that we gave you? Because we had counted all this money out in front of him. And it became this huge drama in front of our hotel. And like, we're going through the cameras, and they have video footage of him like going back to his car and stuffing the money in his pocket and all this stuff. And so that just kind of, after a series of kind of similar experiences throughout Indonesia like that, we were just like, fuck this. Like, we need to go home. But, all that aside, we did have some other kind of crazy experiences. We experienced two earthquakes while we were in Asia. One was in India and one was in Indonesia. But the start to our our second trip to India when we went up to the Himalayas was pretty wild. So we kind of went there early, and we were there basically at the tail end of winter, and the storms can be terrifying in the Himalayas. But basically, when we got there, I think in the first week, it was freezing cold still, and a lot of those buildings, they don't have central heat or anything like that. A lot of the time, you don't have like hot showers. If there's no power, there's no hot showers because they're usually heated by electricity. Um, and so there was an earthquake that week that had took out a transformer, which basically took out power for the entire Kangra Valley and most of the state. And so it's like snowing at this point, and so we have no power, no heat, and so they got the transformer running after I think a couple of days, and then lightning struck the new transformer and blew it up. And so then we were out of power again. And again, freezing cold, no heat. We're in the mountains. It's winter, and so everything basically in those valleys is run on generators because they get power cuts all the time. And so because this was a new facility, they didn't have a big enough generator to run power to all 9 rooms during this time. And so they replaced the board so that they could keep the power on because it was constantly cutting out. So basically, if one person was showering and one person was had a light on, like the power would cut out and you'd be out of heat or hot water again. And so they spent all this money at the Ayurvedic hospital that we were staying at to put in this new board, and then rats chewed up the new board. So this was just at this point, we were like, what is going on? And so they ended up finally repairing the board, and we were able to finally get power to our room and hot water to our heat again. But it was like, I think around 5 days where we had no heat, no lights, no hot water in our at the hospital that we were staying at, and it was freezing cold in this building that whole time. So that was kind of crazy. And you had all these lightning storms and intense rain storms that were happening during that time. And it's kind of nerve-wracking also because a lot of the architecture and infrastructure there is very shoddy. It's like you'll be walking down a little road and it's often, and you'll just see like a building that was there that has just slid down the hill, stuff like that. So that was a nerve-wracking experience. And the other earthquake that happened while we were in Indonesia, basically was even stronger. So we had rented a villa, and we had 2 rooms at the villa basically, so that the 2 of us could kind of have our own space and get more rest and have 2 big beds. But both of us were woken up in the middle of the night, and these beds have those kind of old school canopy beds that you have mosquito net around. And in the middle of the night, both of us were just shooken out of bed because everything was shaking. The whole bed was just going like this. And you're kind of staring up and looking at the fabric canopy above your bed, and it's just going crazy. And didn't realize it was an earthquake at first because I was just kind of woken out of my sleep. And so I walk outside to go and see if my fiance had felt the same thing. And the pool is just going like this, splashing waves like crazy out of the pool onto the pool deck. And so my first thought was like, oh my God, it's like are we in tsunami range? Because if there's an earthquake in Indonesia, a lot of the time it's followed by a tsunami because the earthquake did happen in the ocean. So luckily we were far enough away, but that's just one of so many wild experiences that we had while we were in Asia that, to be honest, like make it exciting. You have these moments where, you're kind of vulnerable and You're in a strange country. You don't know what the medical is like. You don't know what the police is like. You don't know even what, a lot of people around you don't speak English. So it's like when something's happening, you don't really know what you're supposed to be doing. But I don't know. It's a really exciting place to travel. I'm a big fan, and we definitely have plans to go back to Asia.
Well, it always seems like it's the misadventures that we often care to tell people more than anything. I don't know if it's just because like misadventures are so heavily tied to our memories or anything like that, but I think it's just one of those things where it's something hard that we were able to overcome and we were able to take something from. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about traveling and seeing the world. And, especially with what you described and some of the areas that you were in, it sounds like it was just very, very simple living, especially when you're getting to these rural villages. I didn't mention this to you when you and I were connecting, but I was actually a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer for a couple of years. I lived in West Africa in similar situations like you described. Rural village, just kind of became part of the community over time. My water situation was just these communal taps spread around the village that were run by solar panels that would only come on during like certain windows of time during the day. And so I had to collect as much water as I can and carry it back to my hut. And I had to run it through a filter so I didn't get like dysentery or giardia or anything like that. So, but those are the stories that I like to tell because it's just like, going through challenging situations, it molds us for the better. And it also teaches us those other skills like problem solving, keeping calm under stress, and things along those lines too. So, but what I'm curious to ask you is just being away for that long, especially kind of living in the type of settings that you were describing. What was it like coming back to North America and back into Canada, into I guess I'll say, the first world, so to speak, even though maybe parts of some of these countries that you've been to maybe might not quite fit that. So, yeah, just was reverse culture shock. Was that an issue that you had faced, or were you able to kind of sort of just hit the ground running again? What was that like for you?
Coming back was so difficult after being in Asia for that long. It was absolutely reverse culture shock. And, it's taken me a few months to really like shake that off and I guess readjust to the frequency of life here. Because when you're in these places, and I'm sure that you've probably experienced this in a lot of your travels, because it sounds like you've had to do similar things. It sounds really similar to a lot of the living situations that we were in certain parts of India. But there is so much life happening in these places, and culture and beauty and um, uplifting energy and ritual and music and delicious smells and people gathering. Everywhere you go, there's a sense of community and there's people that are interested in you. And a lot of the things that a lot of people would think are dirty or run down are really what give it character and make it interesting. And I think after coming back, as I was kind of arriving, it kind of actually it's the culture, the reverse culture shock started actually when we landed at our layover in China, because we got, I think, I can't remember which airport we had landed in, but basically, I was coming from just so much, religious influence and cultural influence and color and food and all this beauty. And we got to this airport and it was just like gray, and everything is just concrete and metal and there's no art. And, obviously being a communist country, that's something to expect, but it was reminding me too much of home. And so when I arrived in the Vancouver airport, they obviously have a little bit more going on, like a little bit more art and stuff like that. But basically, we got to the Vancouver airport, and everything was just instantly hard. And that's kind of when the reality of coming home started to set in, because basically we got to the Vancouver airport. It was super late at night. And immediately everything just became more difficult. So you get there and we had plans to basically go rent a car, um, and then go just find a place to stay for a couple of weeks. And because it's been so easy to just do that in Asia, you can arrive in the middle of the night anywhere, and you can get a vehicle, or you can get a bike, or you can pay someone to take you somewhere, and there's going to be a place for you to stay. You can negotiate on how long you want to stay there for. And it's easy for the most part. And so you kind of get back and you realize it's like, you know, um, okay, we need to book a hotel, but all the hotels are booked, and all the hotels immediately are starting at $500 a night. And you're like, well, okay, it's like middle of the night. What do we want to do here? And we had gotten used to looking at places before we would stay in them, because we'd stayed in. I could write a book on how many shitty places with bad beds that we had slept in. And so we got into the habit of looking at places before we would book. And so the only place available is this super fancy hotel, and they wouldn't let us look at it. So we're like, fuck this. And so, okay, I had my parents lived a couple hours away from the airport. And so we're like, whatever, we're going to book an Uber and just drive out there, and we're going to show up, and we're going to figure out the rest of our plans once we get back. And so then it starts with, okay, you need to have a cell phone number and a SIM card to book an Uber. So like, okay, let's go get a SIM card from the thing or the kiosk at the airport. And so you go and buy it. And then because we've been out of country, both of our cards, buying SIM cards, were triggered for fraud. So we couldn't get SIM cards. And now we can't get an Uber because we can't get SIM cards. And so, and it's not convenient for us to stay in a hotel near the airport. And there's basically no way to get anywhere. Like, our public transit system is terrible there also. And so we're like, fuck it. We'll pay like whatever it was, $300 to take a taxi just to get somewhere where we could sleep. Because at this point, we've been doing this for hours, and it was like 3 a.m. And it was just so obvious that you had to be locked into all these systems just to do anything here. And that was really frustrating to come back to, because everything had been so seamless and easy and free in these places that we were. And so I had this moment where we're driving back, and it's dark, and we get into a taxi with this driver, and you can just smell the liquor on him, and he's swerving all over the place. And that was a scary drive home. And I'm just kind of looking around, and everything looks industrial. Nothing has been created for the people that live there in Canada. And I imagine probably parts of the States too, but specifically Canada, because that's where I'm from. It just became very obvious to me that I don't know who this place is for. Nothing has been created to complement nature or to be beautiful to look at, or is designed for the people that live here to really enjoy. And I had this kind of a heavy feeling come over me as we were driving home. And after all of that chaos of just basically trying to get somewhere to sleep after a long day of travel, because it was something like 21 hours or something like that to get back from Indonesia. And then for just a few weeks after, kind of settling into just being back home, it was very obvious that nothing had changed for anyone here in the year that had left. It was like we were on two different timelines, because for me and my partner, we had felt like we had lived 1,000 lives over this past year. We had so many experiences in all different forms in different places. We were having incredible religious and cultural experiences. We were connecting with people from all different walks of life. We were having incredible adventures that were both terrifying and exhilarating, and then to just come back and feel like we had grown so much within ourselves and seen so much of the world and of people, and then to come back and it was like, basically like a couple months for people at home. it's as if only a small amount of time had passed, but for us, it felt like forever. And so that was kind of difficult to deal with because you have so much that you want to share with the people around you, and they just cannot understand you know in any way what your new reality is and what your new perspective is, having had these experiences, which I'm curious if you have also felt that, going and just seeing people living in a completely different way. Like, does that resonate with you at all?
Absolutely. As I was just kind of listening to what you were just talking about, and going off of my experience in West Africa specifically here, and just interacting with the culture there, two things kind of stood out to me while I was there. One was simplicity, and the other one was community. And going on simplicity first was that. I didn't have electricity or running water in my house. And so one thing that was kind of good about that is that it really optimized my sleep quite a bit because, once it got dark, what else was there really for me to do? I mean, I couldn't turn on a TV. I couldn't connect to the internet and scroll through social media for hours on end. And so I just found myself going to bed not very long after because, if I wanted to see at all inside my house, I either had to wear a headlamp, which would drain battery, or I would have to light a candle and just try to find my way around with holding a candle in front of me. So, sleep got optimized quite a bit. And then also, Bronson, I got in like nasty physical shape when I was out there too, because I either had to walk everywhere I went or I had to ride a bike everywhere I went. And then also the simplicity there too was I wasn't bogged down with stress of having to pay utility bills or putting gas in a car or maintaining a car or anything like that. And so there was a lot less stressors in my life. Not having like all those things. And then also going on with the community aspect is just, walking through my village, especially right around lunchtime, you'll see like all kinds of people sitting around a food bowl together, talking and sharing like food from the same food bowl. And then they were just engaged with each other, engaged with talking. And that was the type of community and culture where they pretty much had an open door policy everywhere, like around the village. Like any villager can go into another villager's house, just walk right in and say hello. And that was a little bit difficult for me because, obviously growing up in the Western world, it's like, we lock our doors, we have boundaries in place like that. Right. So that was kind of hard for me to get to. And I don't think I fully stepped into that because my house was like the only place where I could actually be alone at the end of the day. And sometimes, you just need that alone time. But also, coming back home, it did make it pretty difficult because for one, and you probably have observed this too, when you like first landed back home in Canada, was there ever a place that you didn't go where someone wasn't sitting around with a group of people and at least one of them was looking at this? And by this, I'm holding up my smartphone for anyone who's not watching the video on YouTube. And so not everyone was actually present with the people that they were actually physically in the proximity of.
Oh, absolutely. And you become so aware of it because that's just not how you live when you're traveling in these places, especially because you don't know when you're going to be back in these places. And if you have that awareness that that I may never actually ever get to come back here, and you're definitely not going to be back in that place, in that moment, in the same way, because a lot of things change, life happens. Sometimes you don't get to go back and visit these places and have these experiences or ever see some of the people that you've met for only a few days ever again. So you become very conscious of that, and you become very present with the people that you're with and the experience that you're having. And so you kind of come home and you see everyone tapped into those devices. But the other thing that was really jarring when we first arrived, because I had become such an open person while traveling, I automatically, it had become in my nature to just want to engage with people, to ask questions, to be friendly with them, to get to know them, because that's just what you do, especially in India. And so when we came home, and I have this new way of being, this new personality that I've developed over the past year, and you go to a coffee shop and it's like, as soon as you start going off script, like beyond Hey, how are you? Oh, I'm good. What can I get you? If you go beyond that and you start actually being interested in the person that you're interacting with, they panic and they freak out and they get super awkward and almost immediately reject you because people are so socially awkward and uncomfortable because they are poorly socialized here and we are addicted to our phones and we do have this fake sense of community because we're all in group chats all of the time or we're engaging on social media but not actually meeting in person. And so that experience kept happening uh, when I first arrived at home. And so after a while, I started to notice within myself becoming like more and more closed off because every time I'd have an interaction with someone where I'd try to connect with a stranger, just being normal, just talking to someone, being interested in them and their day. You're serving me something, we don't have to pretend that like this is, you know, all that this interaction has to be. And so that was really difficult for me because I feel like one of the big reasons we left Canada is because I felt like I was becoming institutionalized, basically just having been locked down for so long. Um, and if you follow any of the stuff that I write, I'm very against government control, especially, a lot of the pharmaceutical stuff that was happening in Canada over that period of time. And so um, I had, I was not in a good place with my mental health when we left. And that was a big reason why we took that leap. And so coming back had completely transformed, had completely shook all of that through all of my experiences over the past year. And to feel yourself just slowly closing off by, these small daily interactions that you're having with people all the time, just because that's what our culture is like. I don't know about where you're from, but that's what the culture is like here. And it makes sense to me now why so many people are so depressed, so disconnected, have so little meaning, don't have community. And it's very much now a part of our culture to be like that. And it's obvious that that's why so many people are unhappy. They don't have this sense of community. They don't know who to trust. If you even think about like the idea of like a suburb. I walk around the suburbs, where my folks live when we're visiting them, and everyone is kind of like living in a village with a bunch of people they don't know. Same with apartments. People are stacked on top of each other. That's all they're building anymore here is just these super dense multi-unit dwellings full of people who don't know each other, who have no shared values. And so I think that creates like a lot of uh, social distrust because you're not surrounded by people who you know that you can trust, who you know that share your values. Whereas like you're speaking about, sure, maybe there's some issues with privacy or family is kind of in each other's business and stuff like that. But the fact that you are living amongst a group of people who care about each other and are interacting with each other on a daily basis is huge for the overall wellness of a community.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting in this day and age, again, talking about like things like smartphones and how we're so connected with the rest of the world, but yet we couldn't be further apart from one another in the end. And, to your point earlier, is just so many people seem to be concerned about what's happening with people like hundreds or thousands of miles away, or even as far as like on the opposite end of the earth, but they don't even know who their next door neighbor is or who lives across the street for them or anything like that. They're so wrapped up in like what, oh, this politician said, what this celebrity's doing, the current affair happening with whomever way beyond yonder. And it's just like they don't even know who their neighbor is, or if they had an emergency and they needed help this afternoon, could they call on someone within their own vicinity to come help them? Because they're so worried about what's going on elsewhere. Where if you just want to go back 100 years ago, if something happened on the other side of the world, would you ever know about it? Were you ever meant to know about it? And so I think again that creates that disconnect that we're having more and more. And I almost think to some degree, maybe going back to what you talked about with a lot of people feeling this depression and everything like that, maybe a lot of it is because they are really seeking this like sense of community, but not a whole lot of people are like extending it forth to them. And so like I try to do the same thing. And maybe this is something I picked up from my time in Africa, where it's like anytime I check out of the grocery store, if my cashier has a name tag, and that's something that I like to do. I actually, even though there's self checkout lines available, I still like to, go through the cashier every now and then. And if they got a name tag, I will actually greet the cashier by his or her name. And they kind of look at me with this strange look because I'm probably the only person that day that actually humanized them in that way, to the point where I would actually acknowledge them as a person with a first name that is clear as day. It's like right there on their name tag, where probably so many other people just go through that checkout line and just view them as a means to an end and nothing more, rather than just like a human being who is probably facing the exact same shit that I'm dealing with in that day, or maybe even more so. But there they are, putting in the work, and everything. That like that person's got a story. That person's human. And so I'm actually going to try to, put on a big smile, say good afternoon or whatever the greeting for the time of day is, and try to humanize that person a little bit, more than just, like I said, viewing them as a means to an end.
That's a really good and easy way to also cultivate positivity within yourself, because we know when we're being a good person and when we're doing things for the right reasons. I mean, even something as simple like, since I've gotten back, I try to just check in with my friends regularly. Even if it is just a text message, but okay, we have these tools and they're convenient. It's so easy to just like send someone a message and be like, "Hey, buddy, how are you doing today?" It takes zero effort to make people feel cared about. And again, like, just since I've been back, committing to plans or going out of my way to make sure that I'm getting time in person with friends and things like that, because it's just my values are I value this so much after getting to be a part of community in these other places. And even, for example, like some of our experiences traveling, the ways that strangers have treated us, I've never been treated that way, even by people I'm close with back home. Like, for example, not on this particular trip, but several years ago, I was in Mexico, staying up in Tepoztlan, which is kind of a rural community in the mountains, a few hours outside of Mexico City. And I I was going nuts on the street food, and I just got deathly ill this one day. And there was a local guy that we had met in a cafe just the day before, and he had invited us out and taken us for this hike on this really special place that only the locals know about, with his son. And we had spent kind of an afternoon with a total stranger, and he was just so warm and welcoming to us. But we didn't know anyone in this village. Nobody spoke English, and we were staying in a compound that the owner of the compound wasn't even there. And so, me being super sick, my partner was very worried. And so she just messaged the only person we had a phone number for that spoke English. And within like 2 minutes, he was on his motorcycle down at the complex. He knew which complex it was. And he was like visibly concerned about me as a friend, and came to check on to make sure if I needed anything, or if he needed me to take him to the hospital. And so just little things like that, where you get to experience the way that community functions in the other places in such a positive way. It inspires you to want to try and cultivate that at home. But a lot of people just don't understand because, like you said, they've never experienced it. Or, for example, in Sri Lanka, we stayed at this place for like $20 a night. And it was just run by a couple in their 60s. And they were just so warm and welcoming and treated us like family. By the time we left, they were calling me their son, and my partner their daughter. And I was calling them mama and papa. And they had invited us to like the village bakery, at 1 a.m. They're like, "Hey, do you want to come check something out?" And so they took us to the village bakery, showed up, like you said, walk in and their neighbor's door in the middle of the night to go and get pastries. And And then they invite us into their home. We spent the night talking over instant coffee. And like, that's what's missing for people back here in North America.
Absolutely. So, how are you going about trying to find and cultivate community like in your life now that you're kind of back in this side of the world full swing? What's that looking like for you?
So, I have been trying to do a better job with the people who are already kind of in my life that I feel like um, I probably could have been a better friend to before. However, on top of that, I have been using some of these online communities to better connect with other people. So I actually have my own network that I created a few months ago called the Moss and Blood Network, and it's a kind of an online community that I'm trying to grow, um, surrounding things like fitness and hunting, and just self-reliance and philosophy and that sort of thing. And so I've been kind of growing that with the intention to do events later, because ultimately I want things to lead to people meeting in person. Um, so that's something that I'm going to be diving into a little bit more this year to try and organize things now that I'm back in North America. Um, and I just think that rather than keeping these communities totally virtual, they can be used to bring people together in different regions, because like apps like Mighty Networks, where you can kind of build and brand your own community on there, it'll tell you like which guys are in different locations that are close to you. So that's one way that I really want to use some of these technologies to bring people together in person. Um, and I think the hunting community in particular is very different from a lot of other communities in that people are genuinely friends and they genuinely are wanting to get to know each other and build true community. And a lot of the brands and stuff are some of the fastest growing brands in the hunting industry are small American made companies and that are starting out as small businesses, or like, for example, like Montana Knife Company was a company started by one guy just making good stuff, and now it's grown into this massive company, and it's still being run like a small company, but it's now a community of people who love their products. And I've seen that with like Kafaru backpacks is another one. They're the most expensive backpacks because they're the best. They're high quality made backpacks and stuff like that. But I'm seeing all over the industry these brands that is unique to hunting, that the little guy who's just making good stuff is able to grow and is supported by the community at large. So that's something I really want to tap into more with my company, Moss and Blood, and just connect with more guys who share those values of good quality products and interest in the outdoors, community, fitness, and all those sorts of things. And I think for me, that's why I really like that space, because I actually think that's one demographic that it's possible with.
Well, that's a great way to get a lot of like-minded men together for sure. I'm going to put my archaeology hat on here for a while because I told you before we hit record here that that's what I do for a day job. Even down here in Texas and other parts like, in the West and the Midwest as well, there's been discoveries of Clovis culture and like in the form of Clovis points, which the Clovis to many is considered to be like the first inhabitants of, North America. And they date back about 12 to 13,000 years ago, somewhere around there. And Clovis points were these huge spear points that, were supposedly theorized to use to take down mammoths way back in the day. So you imagine that we just like stem from a long line of hunters that were going out there doing these things and sustaining life and carrying it on. And we're pretty much here today because men thousands of years ago found ways to hunt and take down these massive beasts. And and it was all done because they also had to work together. Like no one hunter could probably take down one of those creatures by himself, you know. So there is something to that, though. There's a very primal thing to that, and you know, I'm kind of new to hunting myself, mostly just rifle hunting, but I do want to like get a little bit more proficient with my bow and get out and do some bow hunting. Because quick side note, it's just all the bow hunters I know are very, very fit and capable dudes and, you know, guys that can really slug it out in the mountains for days on end and cover great distances and haul out heavy animals. Um, but like my first hunt was a couple years ago. I did it with high caliber hunts down here in Texas, and I got myself a really big boar. And I tell you, Bronson, when I got the meat back from that kill, and I had my young nephew over who was about 3.5 years old at the time. I whipped him up some of my boar sausage, and I also scrambled up a couple of eggs from some of our extended family's farm just right up the road. So I was feeding him meat that I sourced myself and eggs from a family that I could trust that, you know, cultivated the eggs themselves. And I have never felt so good about preparing food for someone like in my life, including myself. And that was just because, you know, I was learning that skill set the way that many people have before us to, you know, be self-sustaining, self-sufficient, and also just simply just being a good provider too.
Hmm. No, absolutely. I think every hunter that I talk to shares in that experience when they eat the food that they harvested. Like the, I had the exact same experience when I harvested my first kill, which was a black bear here in BC,
Oh,
and
wow.
I had done it by myself, and I had worked really, really, really hard over that season, and I don't know if I was going to get out anything. But basically, by the end of the season, finally had some success, and I killed I think he was weighed in at like two. I think it was about 289 pound black bear. So he was a mature black bear. He's pretty big for a spring bear, uh, and shot him at 10 yards with a bow and arrow. And so I was a late onset hunter, so I didn't really have anybody mentoring me or anybody to show me how to field dress an animal or anything like that. So just from beginning to end, like learning how to uh, shoot a bow and arrow properly, and the whole process of training all year for that to be proficient enough that I would feel confident in taking a shot, and then developing at least some basic skills in tracking and what to look for as far as actually finding an animal, which is not that easy. And then to then go through the whole process of uh, watching an animal die for the first time, and then breaking down the meat myself, packing out the weight, like just even feeling the weight of that animal on my back, and then flash forward to a few weeks later, sitting down, and I'm just looking at like a meal that I've just prepared. And you could almost shed a tear because every time you sit down and you bite into that food or that meat, you get to basically relive the whole experience every time that you have a meal. And I feel like only people who hunt would really understand that and what that feels like. And like you said, to add something to the conversation about self-sufficiency, and the whole reason I got into bow hunting was, again, kind of forced on me, or at least I imposed it on myself, because at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic, I was kind of like, oh, whatever, this is going to blow over. I'm not putting too much stress on this. I'm not really going to pay attention, until the first day I had to go and get groceries, and everyone had freaked out and ransacked the grocery store, and there was no meat. There's no fresh food or groceries or anything like that. There's just canned beans left, basically. And I was like, whoa, this is real. And I didn't want to ever be in that position again. And so that spring, basically through summer until the fall season, uh, I got my first bow, and I basically just spent every day after work shooting. And to then have the success that first year and have a couple 100 pounds of meat in my freezer And meanwhile, all this other chaos is going on around us because this was still like at the peak of the pandemic. And I was able to actually just relax. I know I'm going to be able to uh, provide food for myself and my family was like that was just like true power, if I could describe it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like in this day and age, we've gotten so used to outsourcing like a lot of things to other people. We think about like our self-protection. We want to outsource it to law enforcement, or, if like our food, we want other people to, herd these animals, kill them on our behalf, harvest them on our behalf, and like, put them in like these grocery stores. And oftentimes those animals, and we don't need to dive too deep down this rabbit hole, but they're probably not, being fed the most, nutritious things, or they're probably being injected with some things that we probably do not want those animals to be injected with. And, then they're just being packaged by someone we don't know and being, put on the shelves by someone we don't know either. So there's not really that connection to the food like that you would get when you actually go and source this animal yourself. And then just kind of talking about, self-sufficiency here too, as well, is, a lot of the hunters I know, especially down here in Texas, a couple years ago, they had the snowocalypse or snowvid or snowmageddon, whatever term that they were using for it, where, they were like a lot of places were without power for a long time. Or, then, yeah, a lot of people were bum rushing the grocery stores. I even heard like there were stories of like people like dumpster diving and like HEB, like dumpsters trying to find scraps of food or food that was thrown out, where a lot of these guys I know who basically have meats full of freezer, they're just like, no, yeah, I wasn't really all that concerned. It's like, we stockpiled away plenty of water and things like that. And interesting story, just last month, actually, there was actually a morning where I woke up and I didn't have water like in my apartment at all. Like, yeah, nothing was coming out of the sink, nothing in the shower, the toilet wouldn't fill back up. And so I called the city's water company to try to report the problem. And since we were just like kind of in the holiday season still, the offices were closed. No one was there. So I pushed the button for the emergency line to report the outage. And they said, due to high call volume, we can't take your call. And instead of putting me on hold, they just disconnected my call. So in that situation, what became very clear to me, Bronson, was that, and it goes back to what I know I've heard many times over, and I'm sure you had as well, is that no one's coming to save you. It's just, you gotta like, when stuff like this happens, the only person you can truly rely on is yourself first and foremost. And of course, like I said, I prepared for these types of sort of things. So I wasn't really in a panic over it. But that just really just cemented that lesson home for me, is that, yeah, when stuff pops off, you're on your own, so I hope you're ready, and I hope you have it figured out, because, no one else is going to do it for you.
Absolutely. And I had a similar experience around the same time. Where I live, there was massive flooding that had occurred. I think it was in late 2021 going into 2022, where basically we were landlocked in our little corner of this small town that I live in. And either side of the highway was completely flooded. So you could not leave, and no one could get in with like supply trucks, water, anything for over a month. And so you just see, again, just how it was during coronavirus, that nobody actually knows how to react in a crisis, or what they need, or how to work together. Or even like you see the things that they're buying are not survival items, So people were mobbing the superstore, crashing through the doors, stealing like piles of toilet paper and stuff like that. And so having already kind of gone through that, and then having that experience already of my success with hunting that first year, I was like, I'm not competing with these people. Like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go get 2 giant jugs of water. And then I went and bought a new gun. I was like, if I really need to procure food, I'm going to do it myself if this becomes an issue. And I'm not going to be dealing with all these other things that other people are fighting over. And, people are hoarding gas, and all this kind of crazy stuff was happening. So it's just so fascinating, the psychology of the modern man in emergency situations, you can really see like there's very few people who trust themselves in a survival situation.
Absolutely. And going along with that too, I think you and I both know that physical fitness is a very critical part of this too. Not just with dealing with tough situations when they arise, but it's just fortifying that mental resiliency within ourselves too. It's just a lot of people are kind of adverse to even want to step foot in the gym for, some of it maybe just because they may feel insecure being in there, or maybe they're worried about if they're going to be judged by others, whatever the case may be. But it's just like, I mean, if I can't get myself through an hour long intense workout, or maybe even shorter than that, in many cases, just as well, it's just, how can I really expect myself to show up when, like, the grid goes down, or, there's chaos in the streets, or, it's just, I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to, if I'm going to be able to get food from the grocery store today because it's already been ransacked, or whatever the case may be. So kind of just microdosing that chaos in our lives, like in the forms of like physical fitness and training, or, getting out into the wild, either on the hunt, because hunting is not an easy endeavor. I mean, a lot of guys on social media sure make it look easy, but in reality, it's really not that easy. It's a pretty hard pursuit. Or just like going for hikes or taking on other challenges in natures too, like climbing mountains or whatever the case may be, whatever that might look like. So I think just microdosing that type of chaos in our lives every now and then, makes us much more prepared again for when real chaos decides to set forth, because that's just life. I mean, life is inevitably going to throw those things at us from time to time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's almost become a cliche in some ways, but I'm kind of glad that more and more people are adopting that lifestyle, because it is true. It's like, you know, just having, like you said, those few things that you do a week where you're voluntarily putting challenges in front of yourself just makes you so much more mentally resilient and actually more calm, especially in a lot of these situations, because you feel more capable as a human being. Both, like I feel like, for example, like honestly, most people don't know how to fight. But if you even think of like people who are very anxious, or, even like angry or fearful, like people who walk around with a lot of fear, um, usually it's because they don't have any confidence in themselves physically, whether it's like physical strength or the ability to fight if someone, wanted to attack them, which is a reality for um, anybody really at any given time. Anything can happen. And so when you don't have any like confidence around your own physicality, I think that it's a real problem, especially for men, if they don't have that. So just to be capable, at least in your own self in that way, I feel like just transfers over to so many other things.
Yeah, and it sounds like this is what you're really trying to build up with Moss and Blood. And just kind of out of curiosity, it's just I think you started Moss and Blood. Can't remember exactly when, but it's been a few years since you've had it up and running. Was this something that you found you were able to run while you were doing your travels in Asia and elsewhere, or did you kind of like put it on hold for a while? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I had kept it running. I had put a few things on hold and then focused on other aspects of the company while I was gone. So I had kind of continued doing the online training. We have the Moss and Blood Peak Performance Program, which is a program that I designed uh, as a strength and conditioning program for endurance athletes, basically. So it's just a very well-rounded 4-week program that includes, some weight training, some cardio, some circuit training, hit training, that kind of stuff. And so I was doing a fair bit of that. I also had some help from people at home who were shipping items, like our BCAAs and our creatine and the apparel and stuff like that. So I was lucky in that I was able to have some people help out with that while I continued running the store. Um, Unfortunately, the podcast kind of got put on hold. I had a couple good interviews before I started. that journey through Asia. Um, but I went and I bought a travel mic, really nice travel mic. But uh, it didn't come with the cable that I needed, and because the uh, electrical in Asia is so shoddy, and uh, these particular microphone that I bought um, needs to have that brand of cable, and you're not finding any quality electronics basically anywhere that we were. So unfortunately, I kind of took a break from that, but continuing building stuff, continued reaching out. We're actually looking still for more wholesale deals. So if anyone listening is interested in having our products in their stores, especially the supplements, that was something I spent a lot of time focusing on while we were in Asia also. So again, just kind of uh, adapted to the lifestyle that I've been living over the past year. Ideally, I would like to have a space set up now that we're back in North America for the time being. But yeah, I kind of just continued doing what I could do to build the brand, and I built the network while I was gone, growing the community, and just focused on other things really. But it was definitely not without some help back home.
Awesome. Very, very, very good, man. So, all right. Well, how can we find Moss and Blood out there on the internet space?
Yeah, so just go to at Moss and Blood on Instagram. We've got a link tree there. You can find links to everything. Our website, the Moss and Blood Network, which is on Mighty Networks, as well as the training programs. All of it can be found easily there, or through my personal page, which is at Bronson Lee Norton. And pretty much I have all my projects that I'm promoting on socials there. And you can find the rest of the links just through my page where I'll be sharing some of the stuff that I'm doing.
How did you come up with the name Moss and Blood? It's very unique and it's really catchy, and I like it. So where did that idea come from?
Honestly, I had originally started. I have many endeavors that I have started and then they've transformed into other things. But actually, Moss and Blood originally started as an idea for a soap company that I wanted to start.
Interesting.
And so I had honestly come up with a few names, and a couple of my band members thought that that one sounded the coolest, and so I just went with that. And that was around the time that I really was diving into the bow hunting stuff, and I was like, wait a minute, it's like this is occupying so much of my time and my interest as well as fitness. I was like, I just wanted, and I really liked the name, and it made sense even more so with our hunting and fitness brand. And so I just wanted everything to kind of be under that umbrella, and I thought that it embodied it pretty well.
Yeah, when you put it that way, I can see Moss and Blood. It's very versatile when you're talking about the outdoors, the hunting space, the fitness space, and or you can even put it back to just like, getting our blood pumping when we're in those types of environments and those types of settings and tasks and everything. So now what I want to just touch on really quick in regards to bow hunting is just one thing that I've kind of sort of found, as I kind of started picking up a bow myself. I mean, like I said, I'm pretty new, so I have yet to take my bow out into the wild to go shoot something. But it's just when you have your bow drawn and you're looking through your sights, you literally cannot think about anything else. So I don't care what kind of day you're having, if your day started off amazing or if your day started off shitty, you can't think of anything else in that moment, because if you do, you're going to throw that shot. So you really got to keep that focus in. So I think that's kind of been a big draw for me. And I'm sure you probably might share that same sentiment as well.
Absolutely. And I think honestly, the only way to achieve that state of calm under pressure is through repetition. And, you know, I think Cameron Haynes, who kind of got me into bow hunting initially, um, was always talking about that, just the reps, the reps, the reps, the reps, the preparation. And it truly is the X factor when you're under pressure, because especially with that first bear that I got, I'm brand new hunter. I've never been in this position before. The adrenaline is just absolutely insane. But I had that muscle memory to come back to the steps, in my shot process, as well as just having it in the back of my head already that I needed to walk through that before I was going to allow myself to take a shot. And I think that's the only way to really get into a place to be calm, is to just have the confidence in your own skills, and having done something hundreds, if not thousands of times before you're in a position, and being physically fit, because that's one thing that Moss and Blood kind of advocates for. And what I wanted to contribute to the culture was, when you are physically fit, in the mountains, and you're hiking and you're doing all of these physical tasks, and you're, often probably sleep deprived, or in a caloric deficit, and then you add the pressure on top of that, you need to be physically fit. Because if you're out of shape, all that is going to fall back on the moment you need to take a shot. And it's going to, these subtle differences in your, mental and physical strength under pressure are going to be very obvious when you go and you need to take a shot. Because, even just something as subtle as a crank in your wrist, or a shaky hand, or just the ways you've anchored to your cheek before you draw, will be the difference between a successful shot and not.
Absolutely. So, well, all right, Bronson, we're going up on an hour and a half here, so I'm going to kind of start winding things down so I can let you go on the rest of your evening. But what I want to ask you next, and this is something that I ask all my guests on the podcast, and that is to issue a challenge to our listeners. Because we got to hear some stories from you today. You and I talked about some other valuable, insights and ideas throughout this conversation. But as I say, stories, insights, ideas, inspiration can only take our listeners so far. Action has to follow up to actually go out there and do amazing things. So with that, what challenge would you issue to our listeners today for them to go out there and start living a more adventurous life?
That is such a great question. I've never been asked that on a podcast, so I give you kudos for having a call to action for your listeners. But I think for me, after traveling and after my experiences in the mountains, I just think that adventure is essential to our spiritual well-being, and especially as men. But I just challenge anyone to create a sense of adventure in their lives, whether you're traveling or whether you're just home and in your own neighborhood, is to find a way to explore new terrain where you are, because it will make your life far more exciting and fulfilling when you're going out of your way to explore the unknown.
Absolutely. And that could even just be like really, really small things in your own local neighborhood. You just made me think of something. Where I'm from a very small town in rural Michigan. And one of the ways that I tried to have more of an adventure was instead of taking my usual route that I would take into town, I decided to go a different way. I went on like some of the back gravel roads that we had, and just drove past some really nice looking farmhouses and farmsteads. And I found this sign next to the road, and it was actually marking a place where this great fire started back towards the end of the 19th century, that literally swept across the entire thumb of Michigan. And supposedly it started right at that point, and it was just this crazily devastating fire. And so that was just a really interesting piece of history in my local community that I had no idea about, that I just happened to learn just because I decided to take a different route, to be more adventurous in my own hometown. So that could be something as for anyone else, that could be something as simple as, drive to the next town over and like, try that ethnic food restaurant that you, with the type of ethnic food that you never had before and see what that experience is like for you. Or try ordering something other than your usual at the coffee shop, if you're not ready to branch out that far yet. So,
No, that's perfect. That's my whole philosophy. So you nailed it.
all right, right on, brother. So, what I have for you next is my final three. These are three fun questions that I also ask all my guests at the end of the show. So, of course, you're going to get asked these as well. And the first of these three questions is, what is your favorite place that you've been to so far?
India, easily, hands down. Um, it is such a paradox, you know, the there is no end to the spectrum of experiences that you can have there. You know, one minute you want to pull your hair out, the other minute you are just having the most serene and magical experience that you would never experience anywhere else in the world. So I definitely have to say India.
All right, right on. I'm actually trying to think if any of the other guests on the podcast have said India when I've asked this question. I don't think so. That might be a first, Bronson. I'm not sure. Well, since I can't think of anything off the top of my head, I'm going to give it to you. That that's a first for the final three to come up. All right. So the next question that I have: what is one thing on your bucket list that you have yet to do?
One thing on my bucket list, I would have to say I would like to go trekking in Nepal. Um, After having spent time in the Himalayas in India, I'm really eager to see what the mountains are like in Nepal because I have a couple close buddies who have traveled there and they trekked to the Everest base camp and they just absolutely loved it. So that is definitely on my list of places that we'll be going.
Would that include Everest Base Camp for you as well? Then
I think if you go to Nepal, you kind of have to. I think that it's a rite of passage. I think for people who love the outdoors, and if you can make it happen, I definitely, or if I can make it happen, I definitely will.
yeah, I definitely feel like Nepal is and Everest Base Camp. There's certain places around the world that just have those like natural splendors that you just kind of have to do, like Australia,
Mm-hmm.
Great Barrier Reef, and just there's other places out there in the world too where it's like they have that something that when you go there
Mm-hmm.
you just kind of got to do. So all right, right on. And the last of these three questions, and this is a two-parter. What is your favorite animal, and have you seen this animal in the wild?
Hmm. I would have to say yes to I have seen them in the wild, and I would have to say bears are probably my favorite. And I probably wouldn't have picked that before, but when you're out in the wild and you're hunting and you get to actually watch them and how they behave and how human-like they can be, um, it's very fascinating. Sometimes it's actually more fun to watch bears than it is to hunt bears. So I would probably pick that as my number one.
Well, there is something about apex predators in the wild, like bears, where you know how powerful of creatures they are, and you can't help but just look at them with just a great degree of like admiration. I mean, well, from a distant distance, of course, too.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to live in Florida for a time, and during some of my archaeological projects down there, like I'm deep in like the swamps of South Florida, and I can actually hear alligators like around me too. And at the same time, I was fascinated because if I can't think of there's very few creatures on this planet that I would almost deem as almost perfect, and like alligators, crocodilians in general are one of them. You think about millions of years of being on this planet and never having to evolve at all. They were just made perfect right from the get-go. And
Mm-hmm.
so anytime I would see an alligator in the wild, I had that same sentiment because it's like, all right, you got some power on you too. And it's like the same thing if you see like a great white shark or a wolf or even like birds of prey like peregrine falcons or something like that, or red-tailed hawks. Is just Yeah, it's weird. It's because I know that thing can rough me up in an instant, but it's just I can't help but just stand there and just like look at it despite that fact. So
Yeah, it's fascinating to get to like be that close to something that powerful without barriers. I had a bit of experience in Sri Lanka with that a few times. Sri Lanka is a really interesting place in that it's basically like a giant national park. And so everywhere that you're driving, you're having these insane wildlife encounters. It's like being in a safari the whole anytime you're going from city to city. So for example, there's times where wild elephants would just be parked on the side of the road trying to pick fruit from trucks. And there's another time where we got within a few feet of these huge crocodiles in Oregon Bay and water buffalo and all these just huge, powerful animals. And to get to be that close to them, experience them actually in the wild is amazing. So
awesome, brother. All right. Well, Bronson, that's it, man. That's all the questions that I have for you today. But before we call it a day here, let's just recap one more time where our listeners and viewers can go connect with you. So, websites, social media accounts. What do you got for us, man?
yeah, so you can check out Moss and Blood at www.mossandblood.com or on Instagram at Moss and Blood, Twitter at Moss and Blood. And for my personal account, where I've got a few other projects not related to Moss and Blood, is at Bronson Lee Norton on Instagram and at Bronson L Norton on Twitter is where you can find most of my stuff.
All right, man. Well, I'll be getting all those linked up in the show notes for this episode. Or if we have viewers on YouTube, it'll be down in the description below so they can find everything there to go and click and find everything. All right. Well, Bronson, I want to thank you very much for taking time for joining me today. It's just like I said, I've been following you for a while, and I've really liked all the value that you've been putting out there. And I hope we get a chance to meet up sometime. Next time you're down in Texas, like let's get out in the wild and see if we can literally bring home the bacon, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Josh.
All right. Right on, man.